So it is a new year. It is 2022. And like everyone, we decided that we are going to make a New Year's resolution that none of us are, well, I'll probably keep, but these two won't keep, which is we're going to try some scotches. So there's a whole nother group of whiskeys from another country, namely Scotland. And we are going to go through, and I've collected one from each region of Scotland. So we're going to go through and see if three bourbon drinkers can enjoy some scotches. All right. So I have set it up in a way that is not going to blow out our palates, because if you know anything about scotches, there's one specific region that Chuck is scared to death of. And I put it towards the end. I'm not going to tell him where, but he's already smelt it and probably knows it. So what we're going to do is we're going to start with the lighter, fruitier notes and work our way to those big, bad peated boys. So the first one that we're going to do is a Lowland Scotch. So this is kind of cool in a way. So it is actually distilled in the Highlands, that's where the distillery is, but it's aged in the Lowlands. So it is a Lowland Scotch, but it is aged in ex-sherry casks. So I'm going to make sure to tell you where it's from and what it's aged in. So this is also a 12-year.
TJ, tell us what makes Scotch different from bourbon.
So Scotch is a whiskey. These are all single malts, so they have to be from malted barley, and that's the only malt in them. But the thing that really makes all your scotches very, very different is they're aged in used barrels. So they're all going to be ex-sherry or ex-bourbon barrels. And then with that, because Scotland doesn't have the crazy temperature swings that we have in America, they're aged much, much longer. So a scotch aged for like 30 years is the equivalent of a bourbon for 10 to 15. That's why we get bourbons that are all much younger, and those scotches are a whole lot older. The other thing with scotch is people view that as a status symbol of wealth. So all your scotches are generally way more expensive, whereas bourbon is always seen as the blue-collar drink. Scotch is your white-collar drink. So this is much more down Chuck's alley, and Brian and I get to feel like expensive people.
I feel like I'm underdressed this evening.
So. I know. So basically, drink scotch if you're hoity-toity. If you're completely into instant gratification, be a bourbon drinker.
Drink Henderson.
Yeah. But some bourbons are going that way. Bourbon is slowly creeping up in price. So I don't think it's ever going to compete with scotch in that regard, but it's definitely kind of finding the middle ground, I would say.
I know what you're saying. I went to pick up a Henderson the other day, and it was $11.99.
Whoo! That is $10 too expensive.
Yeah, I used to be able to get that for $10.99.
Inflation indicator.
Exactly. Right. That's my inflation indicator.
So this is, to me, on the nose, is like I get a lot of that, like what I think of as the classic Scotch. It's got that little bit of like a sour apple note.
Yeah. Super fruity. Like it's
yeah. I was gonna say orchard fruit is kind of what I was getting, with a little bit of grassy.
Yeah, and then so obviously the scotches are generally lower proof. This one is 43 alcohol, so 86 proof. So it's pretty low.
Drink this all day.
Yeah, and so it's very watery. It's not like some of the bourbons that are super viscous or anything like that, but it's delightful. Like this is very nice.
It's actually really, yeah. And then in the palate, to me, I get this like toasted, probably coming from that, the malted barley note, the single malt. It's like a toasted grain, what I think of is like if you baked a cracker.
Yeah. Great introductory Scotch here. Like, it's not overpowering, easy on the palate, enjoyable. I mean, the color is like apple juice, watered down apple juice almost. So it just you know, not very overpowering, enjoyable.
That's nice and well balanced, to be honest. Because like
Yeah.
what turns me off about, or has turned me off on some other scotches, not talking peated, but is that sour note that kind of carries through or lingers through and you're in the palate. And this one doesn't have that. Like I like that toasted grain note that kind of dominates the palate for me.
So this is, and I'm probably going to butcher a lot of these names, so deal with it. Glen Gone 12-year. So it was about
Where'd
$60.
Glenn go?
What?
She's
I don't
gone.
know. Glen Gone. He was in the Highlands and then went to the Lowlands to age this stuff. So this was recommended to me by one of the Scotch guys at Westport Whiskey and Wine because, you know, if I'm going to go get stuff, I'm going to get recommendations. And so this is one that he said was a little overlooked and people didn't really think of very much. So, but he highly recommended it. And I think he hit it out of the park. I think it's great. Like if
What's your price point?
$55 to $60.
Not
Yeah.
bad. That's a good
Yeah,
Scotch.
great. Yeah, good Scotch, great price point.
Mhm.
Like that. You know, and you said that's 12 years. I'm actually trying to think of, man, what's the youngest Scotch I would be willing to buy or drink? I don't know. What's the youngest one in tonight's lineup?
12 years.
Okay.
So, yeah. I think if you want to get into Scotch, so again, these are all, I got this list together with the idea that we have bourbon drinkers. So I wanted to make them very friendly to a bourbon palate. And I think this would be a great one if you really are interested in trying to get into a Scotch. You know, there's other ones that are a little more expensive in this flight that I think are better, but this would be a great one to go with. So this is from Campbelltown region, and it's finished in all ex bourbon barrels. So that's why.
There we go.
So the last one was ex sherry, but I really didn't get like the sherry notes you get when you try bourbons, which is interesting.
Yep.
Yeah. So this one is only ex bourbon, and yeah.
Yeah, I mean that's like just a classic bourbon on the nose. Tons of like caramel and vanilla, sweet, like with this oak punch at the end. Like that's
Well, I feel like that transitions into the palate too. Like on that palate, I feel like I'm still tasting bourbon. It's
I'm
not
still
till the
just
finish.
enjoying the nose. Like I haven't even got to the palate yet.
Oh yeah.
It's not till the finish that I'm like, oh, and that's the Scotch.
Yeah, no, on the nose. Well, I get a little bit of Scotch notes on the nose, but definitely bourbon predominant. So it's that vanilla, the caramel, but there's a hint of the apple and the fruity notes kind of in the back of the nose.
Yeah, but I mean they're not necessarily super common notes with like a Kentucky bourbon, but those are notes that we've had on bourbons previously.
Fair enough.
But you're right. No, I mean I get what you're saying, TJ. There's that subtle sourness in there.
Mm-hmm. But yeah, then on the palate, like if you gave this to me, I would think it's a low proof bourbon, which this one is 92 proof. So because again, it's watery, it's not super viscous, but it definitely coats the mouth. It gives you a lot of bourbon flavors. And then, yeah, towards the finish, you still get more of a bourbon finish, that spicy rye finish. I don't know. It's a very bourbon forward one.
So, like, the nose deceives me, but to me, the palate and the finish are not necessarily typical bourbons to me. The palate transitions into this, like, barbecue-y. You get a little bit of that smokiness, so I don't know if it's actually smoked or peated, but I get a little bit of this smokiness that's pleasant, not overpowering at all.
Yeah. Which, again, you'll get that on some bourbon.
A little bit more punch than the last one, but it's not a powerful, spicy pepper that you get on a lot of bourbons.
Yeah.
Yeah. For me, the linger on this is almost like if it was a peated bourbon or like that's where that heavy smoke comes through. I feel like at least for me, the finish, I feel like lingers less spice and more smoke. And something else in there.
And maybe power of suggestion, but now that you've been talking smoke so much, when I go back and smell it, I definitely get a little bit of smoke and peat on the far back end.
Yeah, it's more subtle and then more pronounced for me on the palate and finish. But it's like I said, it's a pleasant. It's like a barbecue-y,
Mhm.
I'm trying to think of like a barbecued baked bean.
This would be a good one if you're grilling or smoking and you don't want a bourbon, you want to go for a Scotch, this would be the one to go with. We just complement all those flavors.
Yeah, this is quite pleasant. I love the nose. You guys know me and my preference for my main candles, and this gets you there. And then even through the palate and the finish is delightful.
Yeah. So this is Glen Scotia 15 is what this bottle is. So, so this one is a 15-year-old, and it is all in bourbon barrels. It's going to run you about $115. So it's a little bit more up there. But I mean, you're getting 15-year-olds, so you're going to have to start paying. Scotch gets expensive quick.
And I'm out.
Mm-hmm.